Okay, you're listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Lisa Haver to provide an update on the school board. Dr. Nakia Owens will walk us through tax preparation services provided by the Campaign for Working Families. And Jason Miller from the Federal News Network will explain what is happening to the federal workforce and what impacts that could have around the country, including here in Philadelphia. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, the usual. So what I'd like to do right now is bring on Lisa Haver. Hi, Lisa. How are you tonight?
Great. Hey, Larry. Hey, Denise. Good to see you.
Thank you
Good
so
to
much
see
for being here with us. It's Wednesday, which means yesterday you had a piece in Hall Monitor. Can you tell us, and the Hall Monitor newsletter, can you tell us a little bit about that and, what's going on right now in the school district?
Well, yes. This maybe the title tells you, gives you a preview of what it's about. The title is "Are You There, School Board? It's Us, Your Constituents." And went to a meeting of a committee that they call the Goals and Guardrails, which is data analysis system that the board came up with 3 or 4 years ago and talk about all the time. And it's data analysis and looking at charts and graphs. So there's a Goals and Guardrails analysis meeting once a month. That's the meeting that I wrote about. And if went there as we were in day maybe say 25 of the second Trump administration, and we're looking like what is happening. And actually, I started that day in City Council, sitting there behind Hall Monitor in City Council, and it was a happy day. Hey, Eagles parade was going to be in a few days, and everybody's happy about that. So council passed 3 resolutions honoring the Eagles. But what I was missing there, and I think you shared my thoughts there, Larry, was, is anybody going to mention the looming constitutional crisis taking place?
No, and it didn't happen. We had a dance party before council.
I didn't get it.
Wow, I picked the wrong week to miss council then.
I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't be happy. We really should be happy. The Eagles won. It was great. I liked the game. I didn't mind lopsided score. Let's have fun. But every conversation that everybody's having with everybody else is like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And maybe you saw earlier today that our president declared himself a king. So I'm hoping that maybe somebody in council mentions that tomorrow. But there was no talk of any of that in council. That was Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon. I get out to the Board of Education, which is the governing body of the school district of Philadelphia, 9 people who control a budget approximately $4.5 billion. There's all kinds of issues when you're in, the 5th largest city and you have a large school district and you have thousands of children you're educating. But I hate to say it once again, the issues of what is happening with what many believe to be a coup taking place in plain sight, the gutting of the federal government. And there's, just in general, people are really afraid. People have come to the school board meetings before. What about ICE? What are we going to do about that? We need more guidance on that. None of that. It was looking at data, reading score data for elementary grades, in particular 3rd grade. The district under the administration of Superintendent Tony Watlington, have made a number of very large purchases. And one was for a new math curriculum called Illustrative Math. And the other one is for the new K-12 reading curriculum. And those things are very expensive. That came up in the presentation that Watlington's people made to the board. And I thought that there were really a lot of issues that needed to be raised, like third graders are taking a lot of tests. You know, the state PSSA test. Now there's this new thing that I believe accompanies the curriculum called a STAR test. There's the benchmarks, which children take. I believe it's monthly to see if they're keeping up with the curriculum. And then there's just all those tests you have to take so you get a report card grade. And that's a lot of tests. And the more time you spend testing, the less time you spend on instruction. There were just statements, as I said, you really need to be ready with your reality checks. Like, when board President Streeter talks about, he as a parent and wanting to know what his kids are doing in school and helping them to read, that's great. But when the board president says we really need to cultivate a lifelong love of learning, I think many people think, well, wouldn't a good way to do that be to bring back school librarians, which at least one person at every board meeting brings up, usually a member of APS talks about that. And you think, well, how are we going to have a lifelong love of learning? We can't get kids into books, to actually sit there and look at books. We had one teacher who described himself as a Lindback Award-winning teacher, has been in the district for over 15 years, had some serious concerns about this new curriculum. And he specified what some of them are. It was, I looked up when I heard the words, an army of people from 440 enforcing this curriculum. And I thought, wow, what's that about? None of the board members had anything to say about that. Hate to be a broken record, because every time I say something, I say, and then the board members didn't say anything about that. So there's some really serious issues. But again, when I and the other members of the public in the audience waited for, is somebody going to address concerns of parents and teachers and the immigration issue? I mean, people know that people are already being deported. We know that parents are now becoming more and more afraid to send their kids to school. And when your child is little and you're taking them to school, you may not even want to be out on the street. That this is going on right now. These are things, not that we're looking down the road and saying, gosh, what's going to happen when? This is all happening right now. And so, waited for somebody to talk about what will it mean as they're gutting the federal government. What does that mean for grants? What does that mean for, federal funding? Tell us what that means for special education programs. There's a lot of different federal grants. I know a group that APS is affiliated with trying to bring back school librarians, and they had applied for a grant months ago. And now they're wondering, I wonder if we're going to get that grant. So you just sit there and say, where's the leadership? Where's the leadership in city government, and where's the leadership in the school district? And I maybe you, Larry, or you, Denise, have some insight into that. But I mean, I'm going to these meetings. You're going to the meetings, and waiting for, hey, Board of Ed, are you there? It's us. Speak to us.
And you're absolutely right. Leaders can't be afraid in the face of these things, or they at least can't outwardly be afraid. Their silence means they're afraid, and they're not going to. They're hoping that Trump doesn't notice Philadelphia.
Well, I don't know why they would think that when he has basically called Philadelphia out by name on more than one occasion, particularly when it comes to the elections.
The only
Um,
people in city government who have really done anything are Rue Landau, and a couple of the other council members, Jamie Gaudier, um, Catherine Gilmore Richardson, a couple other council members who were at Councilmember Landau's hearing
Mhm.
a couple weeks ago about like, what do we do? And, not a lot of answers came out of that because nobody, people are still figuring things out. But I thought it was important to show people, hey, we're publicly talking about this. And I
but
commend them for that, but nobody else is doing anything. There's no other leadership anywhere.
but can I just interject for a minute? When we talk about leadership, to me, leadership isn't always taking to the streets and grabbing the microphone and saying stuff, to people in any way, shape, form, or fashion. To me, leadership also include, you got to have an inside game and an outside game. Part of the reason why the folks in Chinatown all need to write NBA Commissioner Adam Silver a really nice thank you note is because if it were not for him, that stadium would be going there. And the reason why the stadium would be going there is because they had no inside game at all. They had no inside game, meaning that all the protesting and stuff they were doing outside was nice, but they had no one speaking for them on their behalf inside. And right now, everybody is so focused on we need an outside game. No, you got to have both. And
but I don't know about that. What is the inside game here?
I don't know.
Can I
there is
throw
none.
a little insight?
But,
There's like three people.
we're not asking about the inside game at all. Everybody is so focused on there not being an outside game that we don't know who's talking to who about what.
Absolutely correct. And yes. And so when I go from city council, walk up Broad Street to 440 and go to the Board of Education, I am going from a meeting of 17 elected people who were elected by the people of Philadelphia in a free and fair election and had to go out on the campaign trail and tell people what they were for, what they were against, what they believe in, what they've done, why people should vote for them. And then when you walk up to 440, you are looking at people and you are not hearing much. This was the Goals and Guardrail meeting. The meeting 2 weeks before that was an action meeting. And I want to tell you, they said nothing. And I'm not exaggerating when I say they said nothing. So the inside game in the Board of Education is trying to get people who have no accountability at all to the people of Philadelphia. They're selected by the mayor. They're confirmed, and even that's questionable at this point, by city council. The members of the Alliance for Philadelphia Public Schools, since the board came back, have been, not just us, but we're the ones trying to get in. People have been shut out of even the nominating panel meetings. You can't even know who's being considered. You can't know who's voting for whom. It's a completely closed process. So it seems to me, if I'm following you, Denise, all we got is an outside game. I'm standing up in the aisles at the Board of Education, having police officers, not just me, but I'm one of the people. So you have to stand up and you have to hold up a sign. You say, what are you doing? When I got up there and said, this district is going to be closing schools, there's only one committee that's meeting. And that committee, we need the schedule posted on the district website, and we need public testimony, because any committee that is formed by the governing body is subject to the Sunshine Act. I got a 2-word response. This was after we wrote a letter and waited a couple of weeks, and I said, you didn't answer our letter. And I got a response, which was no comments.
And there's an abdication of responsibility there when leaders, knowing that people are worried, aren't saying anything. They have an obligation to do so at every level.
They really do. I mean, you can say, listen, this is happening now. I'm not going to stand here and say I have answers to everything, but let me tell you what we're dealing with. Somebody came and spoke about ICE. Here's where we are right now. You know, what are we going to do about federal grants and federal funding? You know what? We're going to have a special meeting, emergency meeting, and here's people just want to know that their leaders, people who are either appointed or elected leaders, are dealing with the reality that they're dealing with, and we are getting nothing.
No.
It's shocking. This guy declared himself a king today.
Yeah.
There's really a lot of issues, and people deserve leadership. They don't deserve to be told that the most important thing is like you can't stand in the aisle, and we're going to talk about, you know, whether or not you can have a sign, which obviously, you know, is a First Amendment right. Where is the leadership? Where is the leadership? Who's really out there saying something has to be done? And we're going to, you know, yes, this is city government. I mean, or when the federal employees who live in Philly are tossed out on the street with no salary and no health insurance, that's going to affect the economy of the city. You know, if the children who go to the schools have to hide, if their parents are getting laid off is really too strong. I mean, too weak a term, tossed out. What's going to happen then?
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, where's even any coordination between the school district and city council? It's so, I hate to say shocking because I see this all the time, but as things get more and more frightening for people, it becomes more and more shocking to me that there is silence from the people who said, elect me, I will be your leader. I will be one of your leaders, and I will come up with solutions the best that I can to the problems that my constituents are facing.
What would you like to hear from them? Because that becomes the question. Because, you know, I've heard
acknowledgement. That would be a good start. Somebody to say, oh, we know this is a problem.
Well, like I said, if they say, let's give you a little picture of what would happen if we lost federal funds.
Yep.
Let's tell you like how many positions of people who work in the schools are actually paid by federal dollars. Let's tell you what's going to happen with special ed funding. Let's tell you what's going to happen with Title IX, all of that stuff. We can't do it all here, but we're going to have a special seminar. We're going to have a Zoom meeting. There's a million things they could do, but they could start by saying, we're living the same world you are. We see what's going on. Here's how we're going to try to deal with this. They seem to just, like, as you would say, Denise, they want a cookie just for showing up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, I guess my question is, if people don't think that their leaders are doing enough, what are they doing to push them? Because again, it goes back to the concept of inside game versus outside game. It's nice for folks to reach out to us at Hall Monitor and say, hey, I think my leadership needs to do something, but are you showing up at their office? Again, it goes back to the concept, inside game, outside game. If you don't have your inside game, your outside game is not going to be enough. And the inside game is going to your school district people, I don't mean you, Lisa, because you do that. I mean parents. I mean those who are concerned, going to the offices of the council people, going to the school board, going to where your leaders are and saying, hey, look, you
sorry,
need to
I
do
lost you there for a minute, Denise. I'm sorry. Could you
That's okay.
Whatever you said in the past 30 seconds.
Well, like I said, when I talk about this, I'm not necessarily talking about you, but what I'm saying is if people Power concedes nothing without a demand, the late Frederick Douglass told us. It never has and it never will. What I need to know and what I would like, and what my question is, if the power is not doing what people think it should be doing, where is the demand? Where are the people making the demand?
Well, in terms of the school board, which is not elected and doesn't have to go before the voters and be accountable, you'd have to go, unfortunately, to the mayor and to city council. The mayor appoints, city council confirms. There has been a noticeable lack of leadership, in particular on education issues in city council. And that's not really that's not new, even with this body. There's really been a serious lack of leadership in council. I mean, as soon as the board started talking about closing schools, APS was, going and talking to council members. I know other people in other organizations were too. But right now, I am not seeing, I will say we're able to get to talk to one of the staff people in Catherine Gilmore Richardson's office. But I would say start with what APS is saying is, why are we being shut out of these meetings? We want to be there when people who were selected for this committee by some process, somehow, by somebody, we want to be there and have something to say to them. They're acting like in place of the governing body. Well, I would like to see some council members say, yeah, I want my constituents to be able to go to that meeting and give testimony.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to leave it there. So, Lisa, thank you so much, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Yeah.
And now,
thank you.
Yep. We're going to have our interview with Nakia Owens, Dr. Nakia Owens, from the Campaign for Working Families. All right, Nakia Owens, President and CEO of the Campaign for Working Families. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Campaign for Working Families and what you do?
Absolutely. Once again, thank you so much for having me. Campaign for Working Families, our core mission really is to build and champion the financial well-being of individuals and families. And we do that in a couple of different ways. One of the ways that we do that is through free tax preparation. So we prepare taxes for individuals for free, and we can do small businesses as well, as long as obviously they don't have employees, or if their returns aren't too complicated. We try not to turn anyone away that needs our services. And so with that, we serve several thousand individuals, over 22,000 individuals each year. And that's free tax preparation. We also have a low income taxpayer clinic. So if you are challenged with the IRS, if you owe, if you have other issues or concerns with the IRS, we can get those issues resolved with the IRS through our low income taxpayer clinic, right? So it's kind of two-pronged. It's like we help you to file, but if you have an issue or you need some additional support, we can help in that capacity as well. We also have have a pretty extensive workforce program, because each one of our tax preparers is IRS certified. So all of them have to go through training and certification each year. So just because you got certification and training last year, it doesn't count for the next year, because tax laws change, things change. And so you have to keep abreast of the times. Every tax return is quality reviewed. That means it's done twice to make sure that there are, and to minimize the level of errors and number of errors that, that might take place. And so we train and we certify over 550 staff and volunteers for the tax season. And those volunteers, I would say about 430 volunteers actually volunteer over 18,000 hours in providing free tax preparation each year. And so that's a pretty significant. And the other part of the 550 are actually employed as seasonal staff for us throughout the tax season. So, we lead a pretty extensive workforce effort. We have a registered apprenticeship program. A tax administrative assistant apprenticeship program is the first in the state and first in the nation of its kind. And then lastly, we have a family stability program. So you come in, and let's just say that you have multiple issues. One of the issues, obviously, you have to file your taxes, but you could have other, housing issues and things of that nature. You may want to apply for benefits or see if you're eligible for benefits. And through our family stability program, that program is really aimed to support families that may be facing housing insecurity, so that it can help to stabilize them in terms of their housing, and also so that the young people or the children and youth can remain in their schools. So we really are trying to use free tax preparation, or VITA, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, as a gateway to really connect people with comprehensive resources that address their holistic needs.
That 22,000 number always amazes me. And when you talk about the hours and the number of people you have, it still amazes me, because it almost doesn't sound like you would have enough people to do those 22,000 tax returns. It's amazing that that's able to happen, and mostly volunteers.
Yeah. So last year we did almost 27,000 federal returns and over 21,000 state returns. But it consisted of almost 23,000 unique individuals, right?
Yeah.
That means that, it's, different people, it's not the same people counted twice.
So it's really 50,000 returns. State and federal.
It's just about 50,000.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's even more amazing.
Yes.
So one of the things that I'm always interested in, when we talk about tax returns, I'm sure that with your experts and the work you do, you're able to get people maybe more back than they would if they did it on their own or had somebody else. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So we really make sure that we maximize the tax credits. But let's first deal with the issue that you're going to actually end up paying if you go to a paid preparer. Generally speaking, it's 10%, at least 10 to 15% of what you're getting back, right? And so if you're, we did some secret shopper things last year with paid preparers. And for a one W-2, a very simple return, it was over $200. If you are a gig worker or a 1099, then the fee was over $1,000, right?
$1,000.
Over $1,000 for a gig economy worker, right? To go to paid prepare, because you're doing a Schedule C, you're doing deductions. So the first way that we save you money is that the service is free, right? And then the second way we save you money to make sure that we maximize your tax credits. Because when you go to a paid preparer, generally speaking, there's a base rate, and then you pay for each form that they file. So you're paying for if they're going to do education credits, or you're getting the earned income credit, or you're getting the child tax credit, and you may have 2 or 3 dependents. You're getting charged for each one of those. So let's just say you're getting an $8,000 refund back. You're going to pay at least $800 to the paid preparer, right? And so we make sure that we maximize your credits, that we save you money and keep the money in your pocket.
Well, and $800 to $1,000 is a lot for anybody.
Absolutely.
But if you're somebody who, money's really tight right now, that's a really, really big deal.
Absolutely. And I think that, a lot of the individuals and families are realizing that, maybe before where, $400, $500, $800, you're getting $8,000 back. You're kind of, you don't really think about it. But especially now with inflation and living in, I think, a little bit harder economic times for individuals, they really need that $800, $400, $500 that they would be giving to the paid preparer, even $200 if you're one W-2. And let's just say you're a single individual, you qualify for the earned income credit, which is like $632, and you're getting some of your refund back. $200 off of that $600 and some dollars right there is $400, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so it really does make a difference in the lives of the individuals that we serve, because so many of them are making poverty level wages. They're not making a living wage, right? And this means it means staying in their home or putting groceries on the table or buying. I was meeting with the lady the last week on Thursday, and meeting with her, and she was literally catching the bus with some pennies that she had saved up, and that the $1,200 or what have you that she was going to get back, it meant everything. It meant like her being able to, do certain things. And so I think sometimes, if we're not in that situation, we may take those things for granted. But rest assured, the 56% plus people that we serve making $20,000 or less a year, every dollar counts for them.
Every dollar. Absolutely right. Now, you had mentioned earned income tax credit. What are some of the things that filers should know about in tax season, like the earned income tax credit and things like that?
Absolutely. So, of course, the earned income tax credit is the most effective anti-poverty fighting program in the country. It lowers poverty, across the nation, in every city across the nation each year, right? So the earned income credit is super important, because if you're a single, let's say you're a single parent with one child, you can get up to just over $4,200 back into your pocket, right? And then if you have two children, it's upwards of over $6,900 and back into your pocket. And then 3 children or more, a little over $7,800, and then it goes, up a little bit from there. So these are life-changing dollars for so many individuals. And a lot of times it's either a quarter or half of what you've earned for the entire year. So the earned income tax credit, combined with its, with the child tax credit, is super important, because if your tax liability is, let's just say, I don't know, like $10,000, it lowers your tax liability if you have a qualifying child by $2,000, right? So you end up getting a greater refund back into your pocket, right? And that's how that works for you. So so the earned income tax credit combined with the child tax credit is super important. Also, dependent care credit, right? If you're paying for child care, that's a pretty significant refund or credit that you get that helps to increase your refund, in addition to education credits and things of that nature. If you're a gig economy worker, a lot of those write-offs that you paid for this for parking, or you paid for mileage, things of that nature, all of that adds up to make sure that you get the maximum refund. But those earned income and child tax credit, dependent care credit, education credits are super important.
Is there anything that seniors specifically should know about?
Absolutely. So the 65 and older, your property rent rebates, super important. We help with those as well. We have seniors come in, older adults come in all the time, that we support them with those filings and help them to get their that back. That puts a few $100s back into their pockets as well. So we want to make sure the rent rebate, the property rebate, that we're getting those back into the hands of those individuals as well.
All right. I'd like to bring you Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it, especially since this is something that I personally have used, and it's helped me out a lot. I guess my question for you is, considering what may or may not be going on in terms of the IRS federally right now, what kind of things are you all kind of telling taxpayers or preparing yourselves for in light of that?
Absolutely. So I think that, you have to prepare yourself for any sort of funding adjustments, right? And that, because I think, just across the federal government, that's a real reality for for so many, right? Because you still want to be able to continue to serve just as many or more individuals year over year, right? So I think one of the things is, obviously making sure that that we're staying abreast and that we're preparing for, funding changes, hopefully not significant, but that's something you have to prepare for. I think the other thing is you have to prepare for, adjustments to, policies, in terms of, filings, right? Like, so every year, like, as I mentioned earlier, we certify, we train, and, things change from year to year, right? So we're, you're hopeful, but it might end up where those on the bottom rung, or even now, if you're single, you're paying one of the highest percentages in the tax bracket, right? And so those are things that you have to, also educate, your taxpayers on, in terms of being prepared for some of those changes that are going to come down the line, because they are going to come. And so if your corporations end up getting those big tax breaks, it's going to fall on your individuals that are single. It may affect the child tax credit, one of the things that we have to prepare for, because that also is getting ready to expire if it doesn't get renewed. So we have to, prepare, and educate individuals on that. And just, I think, educating individuals on how they should have their tax deductions, set throughout the year, so it doesn't end up significantly affecting them when it comes time to tax season, because there will be changes in terms of some of those tax law.
Now, I know that you all do a lot around tax time, because it's tax time, and that's kind of obvious. But do you do other things throughout the year to kind of help people understand why you may need to get your receipts together early, or why you should make sure that you know what you can get from the earned income tax credit? I speak for a living. I just don't always do it well. So do you do things throughout the year that kind of help people?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, absolutely. So one, our tax site is open through the end of September. So we provide pretty much tax services through the extended tax season. So the extended tax season goes until October the 15th, right? So we generally are, and we've been every year open until that time, to really trying to help taxpayers. And during that time, we also, because I mentioned earlier, we have a low income taxpayer clinic. So we have outreach and provide education sessions on different topics. We publish different articles on what you should be looking for in terms of a W-2, deductions, child tax credit. So those are posted also on our website. So we do a number of education and outreach throughout the year, so pretty much through the whole year, we're pretty much filing taxes, right? And even after, if we have some left over, we'll file them. You just don't get credit for those taxes until, the next tax season starts. But we're still on post and still open and available to make sure that individuals get their taxes filed. We do amendments. So one thing that you should know is that we just don't do the current year, right? Like the 2024, year. We can do that year and then 3-year prior returns. So a lot of individuals actually come in after the tax season, kind of tax day, should I say, after tax day, and they get their amendments done, or they get their back year or rear, returns done. So we do a lot of amendments, and we do a lot of back taxes really after the tax season. And we do a lot of in terms of those that have filed an extension, we do a number of those. But, we file a lot of back taxes post that tax day.
Do you think that one of the reasons why you may end up doing so many back taxes and different things is because there's a fear that people have of the IRS. They're kind of like the Philadelphia Parking Authority in that they're one of the most efficient agencies our government has. Do you think that plays into it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, you don't know what you don't know, right? You might fear what you don't know. And so a lot of times I feel as though fear, restricts, constricts, or whatever, however you want to define it, and stagnates people in terms of filing. And I've always said, start with 1 year, right? And just start with 1 year. And once you start with 1 year, then they'll file the current year, and then they'll be like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad. Let me come back and do the other 3 years, right? Somebody came in and he's like, I just been putting it off. And then once I got behind, I just, and it was like 5 years of returns, right? And so we did all 5 years really for him and made sure he caught up. But it was really that first year where it was like that current year where he then making them realize like, okay, it's not so bad.
Okay, and I just have one last question.
Mm-hmm.
You all do taxes for low-income folks, but not all low-income folks can physically get to one of your locations to file for various reasons. Is there any kind of service that you all have for people who may be homebound or have issues getting to and from because of a disability?
Absolutely. So we have a virtual online system, right? So you can actually upload your documents and complete everything online. So you can file, there's 4 different ways that you can file. You can file virtually, and all those returns are completed within the 72-hour time frame. And so they'll complete everything with you online. You'll sign whatever documentation you need to sign virtually. And then the other methods are you can actually go in and drop something off and finish it virtually, drop something off, come back and pick it up, or you can stay there and get it done in person. So we really try to meet people where they are. So if you are, have a disability or confined to your home, yes, you can absolutely file your return virtually with us.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing some of your time with us, Dr. Owens. And I'm going to return you to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And Dr. Owens, can you tell people how they can get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So you can call. We have a call center that's available to take your call and answer any questions you have. And you can call that number at 215-454-6483. So that's 215-454-6483. Or you can go to our website to find a complete listing of our tax site locations and the hours of operation at www.cwfphilly.org, and that's www.cwfphilly.org. And we are, open and available to serve you, in whatever capacity you need in terms of getting your taxes done.
All right. Dr. Nakia Owens, President and CEO of the Campaign for Working Families. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We'd like to thank Dr. Owens for being with us. And now we're going to do our interview with Jason Miller of the Federal News Network. All right, Jason Miller, executive editor of the Federal News Network, which I recommend to people. I discovered this a couple of weeks ago, and I'm a big fan now. I think it's fantastic. If you're interested in government, this is a great place to keep an eye on and subscribe to the newsletter. So can you tell us a little bit about the Federal News Network before we get into the interview?
We've been around for 25 years. We started as an internet-only radio station. We moved to terrestrial radio. We moved to bigger terrestrial radio from about 10,000 watts to about 50,000 watts. And then about 6-7 years ago, we decided to become more of an online presence. We still have a radio station here in Washington, D.C. area called on 1500 AM. And on a clear night, Larry, you can hear it all the way from the tip top of Maine to the bottom of Florida. So I'm sure folks in Philly could, if they tune in just right on a clear night, they could probably find us. Though you probably find the Washington Nationals or Washington Caps, so they probably won't be all that excited to listen to that. But what we cover is the 3 P's of Washington: programs, policy, and people. We don't do politics. We're a nonpartisan news organization. So we don't care who's winning, who's losing, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives. Every story, every interview we do answers two very simple questions. Why do you care as a federal employee or federal contractor? How does this help you do your job better? Again, federal employees, federal contractors are our main audience. And the last thing I think is important is we have, when we talk about what we cover the back office part of government, technology, acquisition, management, workforce, pay and benefits. And so we really cover how the government works. And before someone laughs and says, well, the government doesn't work, I will tell you it actually works quite well. There are definitely lots of problems and things that can be better, but the government does work quite well.
Yeah. So right now we're hearing a lot about the federal workforce, but I feel like when people say that, they may not know exactly what we're talking about. So can you, in a nutshell, tell us what is the federal workforce and how does it work?
Sure. It's the federal workforce is the folks who do the job every day to make things happen, and what those things are. And Larry, this could be something as simple as, hey, the common refrain I use is, hey, Larry, what'd you have for breakfast this morning? And you tell me what you had, and I'll granola. Perfect. Well, are you sick from that granola? Are you running to the bathroom, puking your brains out, right? The answer is probably not, because you're talking to me on the phone. Well, that's the government. The government was able to make sure that your food supply was safe. The other common refrain I say is, do you have any family or friends or on Social Security? And the answer is usually yes, my mother, my grandmother, or my grandfather, or whatever. And the answer is, did they get their check on the 1st of the month or the 3rd of the month? The answer is yes, they did. Well, that's the government working. And then finally, I always tell folks, did you drive today? And they'll look at me, and usually this happens if I'm in an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi cab, and they're like, yeah, I'm driving today. I was like, well, that's the government. They provided your state money so you have roads, and the roads are fairly smooth. And yes, they're not perfect, and yes, there's potholes, but generally speaking, the government plays a role in everything that goes in part of your life. And yes, there are things that are crazy and things just makes you scratch your head, but they make sure your food is safe, your medicine is safe, you have good benefits for people who are in need, and so on and so forth. So federal workers are the people behind the scenes that make this work every single day.
So we sort of are seeing now, I guess, what we would call a different plan for the federal workforce by the new administration. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with that and what impact that might have?
What the Trump administration has done is they believe that there's a lot of overspending in government. They believe that there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse that goes on throughout government. They believe the government has just grown too big. And what their idea is to come in and say, let's take a hard look at government and start really decreasing the size of the federal workforce, and then therefore decreasing the size of the government. I think there are very many people within the Trump administration who believe the government should only do stuff that is required by law, outlined in the Constitution, so national defense and the like. And I think that's they believe it's gotten to the point where the federal workforce has just grown too big, and there's too much power in the executive branch from these what they call unelected bureaucrats. So what they've been going through is ways to decrease the federal workforce. The first was this what we call deferred resignation. Now, a lot of people call it a buyout, and it's not a buyout. A buyout means, hey, Larry, I'm going to pay you money, you're going to go away. This is a deferred resignation program. And what they're basically saying is for the folks, and so I think about 75,000 people took it. They will work between now and September 30th, but they won't really go in the office anymore. They really won't do any work, but they will get paid. And basically, they will be off the payroll as of September 30th or October 1st, which is the end of the federal fiscal year. The next thing they did is they decided to terminate all probationary employees. Probationary employees are the employees who have just been hired in the last year and are the easiest people within the federal government to fire. They don't have civil service protections. It's unclear how many probationary employees have been let go. We've seen as much as 12,000 is one number that popped up. I really don't know for sure, but we're hearing a lot about federal employees who have lost their positions. And the next round is a government-wide RIF. Is that what we're expecting? You saw that in the most recent executive order. And in that executive order, they told the Office of Personnel Management, the HR department for the government, and agencies to prepare for a government-wide RIF, again, to lower the number of federal workers again. So I think there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of uncertainty, and that's causing, again, a lot of stress, anxiety, and again, uncertainty of what's going on across the federal government.
So there are so many things happening with the federal workforce. What should people be keeping an eye on, and what interests you the most as somebody who's been studying this for so long?
I think there are two things that are happening with the federal workforce that folks should keep in mind. When you are coming in, and I think what the Trump administration is doing is breaking things, and they're taking let's break everything and build back what we need to build back, because what we may find out is we don't need all these things that we've broken, and we only need certain things. But when you do that, you have two things happening. If you don't understand what you're breaking, that potentially could hurt services. And I think the USAID, Agency for International Development, is a perfect example. They said, well, we don't need to do this. This is not something we should be doing. So we're just going to shut down the agency. Well, there's a bunch of farmers in middle America who depend on USAID to push their grain and their extra soybeans and their extra crops out to the foreign markets. So all of a sudden that gets cut off. And then there's this downward effect on these employees or these citizens that people didn't understand. And I think that is what we're going to start seeing over the next 3, 4, 5 weeks, is this downward effect that, hey, we don't need to do this, but hey, look at this effect it has on researchers. NIH grants get canceled, right? Or they're talking about getting rid of the education department. Well, what comes from the education department? Well, the Head Start program, right? Or the free school lunch program, right? All of a sudden, a lot of people, there won't be money to support those programs if they cut off the education department. And this is not me being giving you hyperbole and saying, oh my goodness, look at all these poor people. It's just a fact of life that the government plays a role in all these important programs. And until you start dissecting and doing your diagrams, okay, education department, okay, they have this and that goes to here and that goes down there and this goes over here, till you understand that whole kind of diagram, you don't really understand the downward effect you have. And I think that's really where we're going to start seeing some people getting upset, seeing Congress getting more involved, is once they understand that, hey, this is not just the government cutting, but this is actually impacting my constituents, the people who voted for me. And so I think that's something to watch out for in the coming weeks.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Thanks, Larry. And thank you for joining us, Miss. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
What is morale like? When you talk to federal workers now, what is morale like? I have a friend that works for the Department of Homeland Security, and sometimes it's a little depressing to have those conversations. So what is morale like?
Morale, I think, is exactly what you expect it to be in this situation where there's a lot of uncertainty. They're seeing people leaving. They're seeing a lot of pressure on the federal workforce. It is fairly low. Again, it's hard to say. You have 1.8 million people in the federal civilian workforce. I can't speak for everybody as this feels this way, but we actually have a poll that we launched last Friday that is coming out in the next day or so. And we asked that question on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being rock bottom and 5 being the best it's ever been. What is your morale? And generally speaking, a solid 70% of the respondents, since it's out of about 7,000 people, it's an unscientific poll. So just to be clear on that, about 75% have said it's either at a 1 or a 2. So that's pretty low. And I think, I've heard directly from federal employees that there's a lot of anxiety. A lot of people are crying at work. There's a lot of, hey, this has never happened to me and us before. And it's happening so fast, and it's at such a rate that I'm not understanding what this means, that I think that just puts a lot of pressure on people. And one thing I think the Trump administration is not keeping in mind, and because they're looking at this as a private sector business, and not that this would matter, but one thing they're not, I think, keeping in mind is these are people. These are people who have dedicated their careers to doing the work of the federal government. They've sometimes taken lower pay. Sometimes they work, they've made sacrifices to their career, to their lives, to work in a specific area because they feel that strongly about the support, the importance of doing this type of work. And there are ways to cut that I think are pragmatic. There are ways to reduce that are humane and empathetical. And I'm not sure that the federal employees feel that is being considered as part of this bigger picture.
Now, I went on your website and I was reading about some of the various places where cuts are going on. And the one that kind of stood out to me as a military brat was the Veterans Administration. The Veterans Administration does a lot of things. And this wasn't a group of people that was necessarily being, I guess the staffing there was already pretty bad. I guess, has it gotten much, much worse?
Right now, we're still waiting to see what happens. So, for instance, the Department of Veterans Affairs put out a press release late last week that said they dismissed about 1,000 people that were on probation. So, again, first year of their job. That has two effects. 1,000 people sounds like a lot of people, but VA has 400,000 people on their payroll. So it's I don't do math well. I'm a journalist like you all. So if someone out there can do math, it's not a high percentage. At the same time, these tends to be young and mid-career people who, to your point, has come to VA to make a difference, to help veterans because they believe in the mission of VA, because they want to support the veterans. Maybe they're veterans themselves and say, I want to give back to my community. And I think that's where the big challenge is. What will those 1,000 people or however many it turns out to be, what will that mean for the services? It's just, I think, a little too early to say it's going to degrade them or make things worse. We're hearing a lot of anecdotal evidence that says, hey, we're just going to have to do more with less. And no one ever wants to hear that. And that never really works out well, to do more with less.
So, wow. And the question just went out. Oh, your site does nothing but cover the federal workforce. That's not something that most news organizations get to do. But what do we get wrong when people who are not you cover the federal workforce? What do we get wrong?
I wouldn't want to put out, say you get something wrong. I think what tends to happen among the general interest or major media is they don't quite understand what the federal government does. And I think that's true not just for media, but I would say it's true for the average citizen. Going back to the story I was telling Larry about kind of like what the federal government does, a lot of times when you hear people complain about the government, they're really complaining about Congress. And they're frustrated with what Congress is or isn't doing. And one thing to keep in mind is when you talk about the federal workforce, they're doing what Congress has told them to do or what the president has told them to do or the administration. And very few federal employees will tell you, well, I got a pot of money from Congress and I just did whatever I want with it. Right? There's not a lot of that happening. Sometimes it may feel that way. Sometimes there's a lot of head scratching going on to go, why did they fund this research of rats who want to run the treadmill to see if they lose weight, right? Like, why is that research happening? Well, I can tell you, generally speaking, Congress in the appropriations bill decided that money needs to go to some project in their district. And there's a provision that said to NIH, you should look into this because they know that the university in their district is looking at rats that run on treadmills to lose weight. And then there's people outside going, I can't believe they spent money on rats to run on treadmills to lose weight. What kind of government do we have here? So agencies are really put in a bad position to meet the goals of Congress that they've set out and then to answer to the public. And I think agencies don't do a great job of their own public relations, of their public, of getting their persona out there. And Denise, put up with me, give me 2 minutes, and I'll tell you a quick story. Every year, there's something called Service to America medals. And this is really what I would label this as the Nobel Prize of federal workforce. Organization Partnership for Public Service puts out, works to really highlight this great work federal employees do. And I was there a couple of years ago, shortly after kind of COVID subsided to a certain extent. And they were talking about the development of the mRNA vaccine. And they told this inspiring story about how the vaccine got developed. And they went back and said, well, we actually have been working on this since the 1980s during the AIDS epidemic. When AIDS came about in the 80s and really started taking a huge effect on the on the gay community, but also on the broader community. They said, hey, what if we did this, this, and this? And I won't go into all the details because, again, I'm not a scientist and I don't do math either. And they said, we started looking at it. And over the course of 35, 40 years, COVID hit. And they said, we have the technology, the understanding, we have all the pieces that come to place to put together a vaccine and get it out the door in record time to save thousands and tens of thousands of people's lives. And I'm thinking to myself, Denise, why didn't they go on the TV and the radio and make a big deal about how the mRNA was not this something that came up in a lab over?
All right, we have to leave it right there. We'd like to thank Jason Miller for being with us, Dr. Nakia Owens, and Lisa Haver. We'll be back next week on Hall Monitor.